Hi, this is Jessie Leanne, and I'm interviewing Joanna Choi for the We Love Buhai Oral History Project. We are at the Global Hub, and it is August 30th, 2018. Hi, Joanna.
Hello.
Okay, so where's home for you?
Home is Atlanta, I would say. So I was born in LA, Los Angeles, in 1991,
Hmm.
but we moved here, I would say, within a year and a half to 2 years after living in LA. And there's four of us, my mom, my dad, my brother, and me. And from LA, we kind of drove cross country over to Indiana, and then we stayed there for a little bit, and then kind of set roots in Atlanta, Georgia.
How long were you in Indiana?
Um, what can I remember? It was probably around less than a year, like 6 to 8 months, I would say. I think my father had someone he knew there, so they kind of just did a pit stop, and then they just like traveled south after that.
Do you have any memory of when you were in LA or Indiana?
Not at all. Nothing. Only Atlanta.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And your siblings,
hmm
are they older, younger?
Yeah, I just have one older brother.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
hmm
Got it.
Yep.
Cool.
He's 8 years older, so we have a big age gap.
Is your other family, perhaps grandparents or
Mhm.
other relatives in LA?
I had my dad moved to LA after being in South Korea because his older sister, he has two older sisters that live in Los Angeles, and they were kind of, I think they had roots set up there for a bit, for at least like, I want to say 5 to 10 years or longer. So he moved to LA because he had family there, and then I have cousins that's there as well, but everyone else is in Korea.
Why did you guys leave LA?
So in 1992, it was the LA riots, and that was a huge thing that happened with like within the Korean American or Korean community. So it was a really just dangerous time. So I think my dad decided to move out east for just maybe hopes of better life and a little bit more opportunity. So yeah.
Have you ever heard from your family or other people that stayed in LA and what that experience was like?
I honestly have not asked. To me, I kind of know it as like a huge event that happened in the early 90s, but I haven't really kind of talked to anyone firsthand like what they went through, but I'll ask. Yeah, I'll ask in the future. It's something good to like learn about just because it affected such a huge the Korean population in LA at the time.
Do your parents ever talk about it?
No, they don't. Yeah, I've never talked about it with my parents. But I think also I was so young. I mean, I was literally probably like 1 years old, if even like a year and a half. So I think they kind of just decided to move forward with their lives.
Okay, let's talk about Atlanta. So where in Atlanta did you grow up?
Um, I remember when we first came, we lived around like Jimmy Carter area. Um, so I guess you can call that like Norcross Tucker area, which is considered now. So there was like we lived in an apartment there for a bit, and then we moved to Dunwoody, and then I would say I grew up in Alpharetta, Georgia, for since I was like 6 years into college.
Do you remember, I guess, what it was like growing up? Like your first memory almost living in Alpharetta?
Yeah, definitely in Alpharetta. I might even have a little bit of memory of when we grew up in Jimmy Carter. I kind of like vaguely remember the apartment that we were in. Um,
What
but
was it like?
it was very, very homey in the sense that I didn't ever feel like threatened. Like I didn't feel in any way if my security or if my comfort was threatened in any way. It was pretty. I mean, it was just me, my dad, my brother, and my mom, so it was just four of us. But I do remember having some other Korean families that I think that lived around the area as well. So there was a lot of I guess interaction between the Korean community in that area.
So that was in like the same apartment complex
Yeah.
almost, so you could just walk over.
Yeah, I think it was either the same apartment complex or like literally on the same street or something really nearby. Because I remember playing with kids, specifically this one family that we were like family friends, where all of us were kind of all similar in age. So we like lived down the street from each other. And then I remember when they moved to Alpharetta, like we moved to Alpharetta, that kind of thing.
Is there a specific memory that you can recall that was particularly meaningful to you, where you got to, I guess, play with other children or families on the block, or spend time communing?
I think one thing that comes to mind, it wasn't in that neighborhood.
Mm.
Oh, but it was. I remember going on like picnic trips, to like Unicoi. Yeah, I know. Like Unicoi State Park. And I will always kind of remember that name because when I was younger, I used to call it like Unicorn State Park. Because I feel like that's like the easiest way to remember it. But Unicoi State Park was like something that we used to go to, have picnics, play by the like water. Yeah, I just remember like having a lot of just sometimes like family trips when we could, and just kind of like play together. And it was always usually with other Korean families, probably because of the language barrier between my parents and not knowing English fluently, and having other Koreans to talk to, and sharing that culture was obviously a huge part of finding that community, especially in Atlanta at the time where there was not that many Asian or Korean people in general.
Did you ever think about how everyone was primarily Korean that you were playing with growing up?
I think I never thought about it when I was younger, but as I started to attend school, preschool, kindergarten, that's where I was kind of introduced to, other ethnicities, other races, and I don't think it really ever fazed me, because I think I was still young and my mind was like malleable.
Yeah.
And I wasn't like set in my ways by any means. So yeah, I think it was always nice having people of different backgrounds, like in my classes. I think that was something that I enjoyed, because I think I started going to school in Dunwoody. So Dunwoody,
What school?
High Point Elementary.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And then I guess what middle and high school?
I think it's, oh man, don't quote me on this. I don't want to say it's Dunwoody High School, but my brother I think went to like River Point or something River. I forgot.
So did you not go to high school in the area?
No, I'm Alpharetta.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay. Yeah. Gotcha.
Yeah, I lived in Dunwoody for I think 2 to 3 years, and then that family, once they moved to Alpharetta, we were kind of like, oh, we should go to Alpharetta too. And at the time, like, housing was still cheap, so we decided to move there when I was like 6 or 7, and then I started going to elementary school in that area.
Cool.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess what was the diversity like from transitioning from where you were in Dunwoody to Alpharetta School?
It was very different. I think Dunwoody had a lot more diversity. I don't know if it was because it was close to the city, or if it was because it was just kind of a more established city at the time. I think Alpharetta was still super new, and a lot of I want to say like a lot of ethnic families were not in that area yet. So I remember my elementary school, I was probably the one of many few Asian kids total that were in my grade. So we all knew each other because there was like 5 of us total.
Did you know their families too?
I didn't know their families so much, but I remember I think all the Asian kids kind of played with each other. Not that we stuck together by any means, but I think we kind of knew that we all looked alike or had some kind of interest in common, so we would like kind of gravitate towards each other. But but I would say my classes were majority like white, Caucasian, like 70-80% for sure, and then there were some Chinese, Korean, and Indian.
And that was in Alpharetta?
Mm-hmm, in Alpharetta, in elementary school.
Did your parents ever talk about the diversity or them feeling like Korean?
I don't think so, honestly. I mean, the neighborhood I grew up in was predominantly white as well, and I think I don't know if they ever felt threatened, and at the same time, I was so young. I don't know if they ever talked about this with my brother because he was 8 years older at the time, but not with me particularly. They would always just, they knew that we had a pretty comfortable life. We were never attacked by any means, or not that I know of. Everyone in my neighborhood was pretty nice and friendly. I was well acquainted with all the kids in the block or my cul-de-sac, so I knew their parents and, the kids we all played together. So there was nothing that, I don't know if my parents ever felt like that. Yeah, I don't know,
For
discomfort.
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, there probably was discomfort, of course, from just the cultural barriers, but my mom was pretty social. So she, even though her English wasn't perfect, she would still talk to like the moms here and there, like if she could. But it wasn't like she had close relationships with anyone like in a neighborhood.
Would you say your perspective changed at all since, I guess, when you went to pre-K and kindergarten and all the way up to middle school and high school? How would you say your perspective on this changed, if at all?
On what particularly?
So you mentioned how like when you went to preschool and kindergarten you started noticing, I guess, diversity and different races and cultures and things like that, but it didn't faze you because everyone was playing, whatever.
Yeah.
Did that change at all as you continued to grow and see more?
Honestly, not that much. I think I always had a diverse group of friends, and I think as Alpharetta started growing, a lot more different ethnicities, like people, a lot of Chinese, Korean, Indian, I would say, would predominantly were moving into that neighborhood. So I think as I grew up, it started to increase, the diversity per se would like increase more and more as like each year as I was getting older. So then I never felt like I mean, there was obviously still a difference that there, my school was majority white, but also down the street there were some other neighboring schools like Chattahoochee and Northview, and they had so many more like Asian Americans or Asian kids than my school did, even though we're like 4 miles on the road from each other. So I guess, yeah, it never changed because I knew there was like diversity around me, even though it was at my school. So I never felt like super isolated in that sense. But I did have like a pretty good diverse group of friends of all races. Like I never really stuck to one race. But yeah, it was pretty good. I would say upbringing, by any means. Like never felt any like tension or especially from what you're hearing now, like in the media and stuff. So
For sure.
yeah.
That's awesome.
I don't know if it was ignorance though.
Oh.
but I mean, from what I think we strangely might have all gotten along that I know of. Maybe my classmates might differ, but from what I remember was that we were all kind of just teenagers, just hanging out.
I mean, your perception and memory is real, regardless of what you think you might not have seen, but it is definitely valid. Did you guys ever talk about race, like you and your friend group?
No.
Growing up?
If anything, we knew our school was majority like Caucasian, so it was just kind of like that knowledge was already out there, so there wasn't really anything else to talk about. But I was involved in like church a lot growing up, so I went to a Korean Presbyterian church, so like I would say there's like at least 10-15 of us that from that church went to the same high school, so we were all like pretty close too because we would see each other on weekends all the time and retreats or whatnot. So I think we were just like all pretty comfortable like with each other, and I think I really enjoy that because I remember friends that were in like Gwinnett County, which they do have a larger group of just students in general in their high schools. They had huge like classes like double our size, and they didn't know obviously a lot of the people that they were going to school with, but since our school at the time was a little bit smaller, like 400 kids, like 450 kids, and you start off together freshman year, like you kind of meet the same kids over and over again. So that was nice. And I think honestly, growing up in the same like school, starting from elementary, middle to high school, you kind of like travel together as a grade. So you just get really comfortable with each other growing up, and that was just like the nicest part about it, I think.
That's awesome. Where do you think your like family as a unit also found community? Was it also in the church that your family?
Yeah, definitely. I know that in the Korean community, especially in Atlanta, because it was so small at the time, and there were not that many like Koreans in general compared to like LA. Coming from Los Angeles to Atlanta, there was like a huge difference. Um, Church was like one of the backbones of creating any kind of community at the time, because that was a place where people could come together on the weekend, usually when people don't have work, so they have the time, and just kind of learn more about each other, kind of understand and empathize with each other based on what sufferings they've been going through or challenges they've been facing, especially the parents, because they do have a lot more challenges because of language. I know that it was really big in the church to just have meals together and like break bread and make kimchi or whatever.
Yeah.
Stuff like that. Or that was really big because they didn't. Where else could they get it? Like where else can you find that kind of community? It's and plus Atlanta is kind of spread out where people are living in different parts. Like I said, I came from Jimmy Carter to Alpharetta, and there are people in Gwinnett. So it's like, how do you find like a central point, right, for all these people to come together? Because you have to drive, and it's not like everything's close by or like in a very dense populated area like other big cities. So church was definitely, I know, was like a huge factor in any new family that was coming to Atlanta to find some sort of community.
Were the services in Korean?
Yeah, so they had services in Korean. The adults had basically all their services in Korean, and for the kids, for like youth group or stuff, it would be in English. So yeah, that was kind of, all the kids, I would say, pretty much spoke English because of school. But yeah, I thought it was just always like English for the kids and then Korean for the adults.
Was there a tension between like the English side and the Korean side, or maybe it's not a tension, but just something that you noticed as interesting or different, I guess?
Not when I was younger. I think maybe in middle school there might have been tension. But I think it's mostly tension just caused by the cultural differences of people. I don't know, I guess the American culture that's instilled in us versus like the very Korean culture that our parents obviously know and have lived and breathed for their entire lives. So, because I would say like the youth group leaders per se, they were like maybe like us, but a little bit older. I mean, not like us, but they were, in their like 20s, 30s, I would say. So they were pretty much either like they moved to the US when they were really young and, like kind of like we were, and they grew up speaking English. So they were like, already in their 30s, and they were like pastoring and mentoring us. So I can say that might have been some like culture clash with like that kind of leadership with versus like the Korean leadership. Just because it's so, there's just like such a difference between the way like very Asian collectivistic, societies were back then versus like the American individualistic society that we live in right now. So will be a clash, I think, like for any just immigrant parent and their kids. Yeah.
Did you ever feel like there was this clash in you or around you?
I think there's, yeah, I think growing up thinking about it, I think you always hear if for example, my mom would always be like, be mindful of others, right? That's always like something like if you're in a restaurant and you're talking too loud, it's like that's not respectful, to people around you, that kind of thing. Like even small things like that too, like you're representing the family when you go out there, so like don't be so rambunctious and scandalous by any means. So I think that was something that was always heard in the household. Just think about our family, think about the way you're representing our family when you leave.
Wow.
In school.
Did that feel like pressure to you, or?
I don't think my personality at the time understood the severity of what my mom was trying to say, so I don't think I ever felt the pressure. But I just kind of did what I wanted at the end, so it wasn't really like it really affected my life and how I chose to grow up. But I mean, for sure, I've always been like scolded by my parents, even my dad too, just to like be mannered, be well mannered. So that was something that was always talked about, but I was still a wild child. So.
Still a wild child.
Still a wild child. Didn't matter what they said. And of course, it's my life. It's the individualism in me that wants to be who I am and not be conformed to what others are telling me to do. That kind of, I think that's probably the biggest, I don't know, not chip in my shoulder if I would say, but like something I held on to a lot growing up, because I knew that I could just do what I want, but that was, I think, hugely influenced by the society that I grew up in and the school and my friends that I had.
This is a personal question, but well, not really. But how do you think your relationship with your parents has changed since like you were in high school versus where you are now?
So, I think my parents are very hands off. They're not overbearing tiger parents by any means, which is a big blessing, I think, because you always hear of stories where parents are always trying to control every aspect of your life. But I think my relationship with my parents is very, like, they trust me, I trust them. Probably maybe because they're like, this girl's not gonna listen to us anyway when she was young. so she's just gonna do what she wants. But I think they know, and they've kind of understood and embraced that I'm very just independent and individualistic in that way, that I'm not going to conform to the big, I don't know, Asian typical societal demands of security and like self-presentation or prestige. So they've never have like tried to force me to think that way since college. I think they kind of just let me be, which I feel like is very American. I'm the same way thinking about it now. I'm like, wow, it's very American that they just kind of like let me go. Like she'll grow up, just let her graduate college, and she'll find something. So I think that was something that I was once again like just blessed with having, that no overbearing parents telling me how to live my life.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
What I know we're talking a lot about your Korean ethnicity. And we'll move on to talk about many other things too. I'm also curious to know like how I guess your Koreanness has infiltrated the way that you've maybe like perceived the world, or like how it might have been an underlying factor in perhaps like relationships or your decisions that you've made, perhaps like career. It's a very broad question.
Yeah.
But, do you see it affecting your like culture affecting things like that?
I think it definitely has. I think it's evolved over the years. I think when I was younger, I had like aspirations to like be really successful and like be like a lawyer or be something where I kind of had like the title and the name, and in high school, like you don't know what you really want to do, but you kind of have like these like far-fetched dreams that you're kind of aiming towards someone, and that's why you go to college to try to make it a reality. Yep, we all know how that goes. But yeah, so I think there's still parts of me that's definitely Korean that has influenced my decisions today. Whether it's like, providing for the family, thinking about your family in the sense of like your parents are getting older, and I think most of the time your parents do not have a 401k. They don't have you're their retirement fund or their savings. So that's always kind of lingered in the mental, like in my decisions, like of do I need to provide for my family, but not even just like my personal family, but my parents in the future. That kind of thing has always, I think, is a very common struggle that a lot of Asian Americans or just immigrant family like kids go through, is like, how do I, and I don't know if it's really spoken, like maybe some parents are very vocal about it, but my parents never were really like, oh, you're our 401k or our IRA. Like, they never told me that. Like, you're the retirement. But I think it's kind of seeing how your family has endured, whether it's businesses or what kind of jobs they've had, and knowing that, it's not that much. And while they're making do, it's like, I don't know how long this will sustain them, So that's always been like a thing that I wrestled with, like growing up, especially in college. I feel like when you're like, oh, this is what I'm trying to pick what to do with my life. Like, do I find something that's a little bit more, brings in the bills, like brings in something a little bit more security wise that I can provide, or do I like pursue something totally crazy and wild and something that like go find plants in the jungle, like that you make like no money in. So
So what did you end up deciding to study in college?
So once again, my parents were not overbearing, so I think so when I came in as like a business major, of course, like maybe accounting or marketing.
Why of course?
Sorry, not of course. I mean, of course, in the sense like something secure, right? Like,
yes.
Yeah, like business or
Yes.
or biology or science, right? Like science or business is kind of like where you find the money, right? So I came in as a business major, and I switched my major like 3 times. I went into advertising, and I switched that again. And then I was like, you know what? I'm going to just try to find something I has somewhat interest in. Like I have somewhat of like something I can listen to in lecture, because the lectures are long and you go, 3 times a week. So it's like, how are you going to sit through class if it's not even interesting?
That's smart.
Yeah. So I chose, one of my friends was an international affairs major, so I didn't even know what that was, but I think maybe somewhat inside me I was always interested about the world, because, I do come from a different world, if you could say. Like, I come from the other side of the world. So I was like, oh, this is interesting, and then that kind of just moved forward from there. So I did international affairs in Spanish, double major, and that was great, because I really think that college for me was just a time of learning, and I loved all my professors. I loved the education I received. I got to study abroad twice because I had majors that would allow for it,
Yeah. Where did you go?
I went to South Korea for 9 months because I was really interested in North Korea-South Korea relations. And then I did Chile to finish my Spanish major there. Yeah. So I really utilized that degree to literally just make an excuse to go somewhere abroad. It wasn't like, oh, like what's practical for me in the future. It was more like, oh, where can I get some adventure and,
But I'm sure you learned so much.
Oh, I mean, you do.
Like, you do. You just have to.
You learn. I mean, if it's not book learning, it's like life learning and cultural learning, which is something I think why schools are pushing so many kids to go abroad these days. It's like not the education aspect. It's like learning what it means to like be in a different culture. And it's, there's that word like culture shock, like where you're like really surprised by how people live. That's like totally different from where you grew up in, and what their culture means, and what it's like, and meeting people of that culture. So that's invaluable, I think, and that's why I chose to go abroad was because I wanted those moments.
What was something surprising, or something that you remember being surprising when you went to South Korea?
How I felt so out of place.
Wow.
Yeah. I feel like a lot of Korean Americans kind of talk about that now, but so I went in 2011, and I mean, I just say this because it's like things were not as easily shared as they are now, right? Through social media. I think 2011 still, everything was pretty like not open in the internet as much, or I was young, I was like 19. But I know like now there's a lot of, people, a lot of Korean Americans like kind of sharing about how they kind of feel like outside, like with the whole like Chloe Kim, like she's Korean, but she's not really Korean. And
who's Chloe Kim?
Oh, she is like the Olympic snowboarder that won gold medal, which is awesome. But I know there was a lot of like press and a lot of interesting like coverage on her particularly. But yeah, when I went in 2011, you guys can't see me, but I'm like really dark and I'm really tan. And you go to Korea and everyone's like translucent and they're pale. Sorry, I mean that's like a desired thing, right? To be pale in Asia. So when I came, a lot of people didn't know I was Korean. They would think I was like Filipino or Hawaiian. I've gotten Hawaiian, Filipino. It's other races beside Korean. But yeah, a lot of people were intrigued by me because at the time, there was still not that many like students studying abroad in Korea. I think now it's gotten huge. Like people love going to Korea to teach English and study abroad. But when I came, even me speaking English as a Korean American was very surprising to students, Korean students. That were like, whoa, this girl looks like us, but she says she is Korean, but then she speaks fluent English, like 100%, and she can't even speak Korean. So they're like, what is this girl? Like, why is she here? Very confusing. So.
Yeah, like they've never seen anyone like you before.
Yeah, they're very intrigued by me. And,
oh my gosh.
Yeah, so that was honestly pretty exciting and fun thinking about it back then, just because.
Did you expect that you would be able to just fit right in and act Korean?
I knew there was going to be, I knew there was going to be a language barrier because I'm not so fluent in Korean, but I didn't expect to feel so different from them. If that makes sense. I didn't expect to feel like we're somehow from the same background, but yet we're completely different people. And I honestly had a lot of hard time finding any common ground with the Korean students. So all my friends were actually international students when I studied abroad. People that I hung with all the time were like from Malaysia, from Thailand.
Why do you think it was so difficult?
I think it was the culture. English was a huge thing, the language, but I think also they didn't understand the American culture, and I didn't understand the Korean culture. Like the Korean culture as in what they perceive to be normal, if that makes sense. Like to me, I can always see Korean culture as like I can always refer to it because my parents were Korean, like they were immigrants, so I like have the Korean culture in me, as in I know what it's about, like I know what it entails, but I didn't grow up believing it or like living it out. Right. It was more of like a side background, and it wasn't a part of my life. It was more of like a reference, if that makes sense. When I went to Korea, these other students, college students, like to them that was their life, and I was like, oh, this is different, because especially being surrounded by it for like 9 months, I was like, oh, this is different.
Wow, 9 months is a really long time.
Yeah.
And it was like that from the beginning till the end.
Yeah, I think almost, which I'm kind of a little bit regretful of, is that because I made such international friends, I think I kind of almost missed out on like really experience like Korean like the true Korean culture, because I was looking for that comfort and familiarity of home because I was away from home. But I just think that I missed out on maybe like what it's really, that really true Korean culture is like, because the Korean culture changes obviously too because the generations are changing, but I might have missed that part too because I wasn't really befriending them, or I wasn't really hanging out with them all the time. I was more hanging out with my English speaking friends, and my friends from California and from New York and from Malaysia. They're all speaking English. So we were kind of our own group, and there were obviously overwhelmingly majority of Korean students that were like we didn't interact with for some reason. Yeah.
That regret, do you feel like you somehow brought that back home in some way where it's changed? This is just an example, like the way you see like people that are from Korea that maybe you would have met in Korea, but now they're in America.
Yeah.
Have you ever run into that situation where you kind of recall where you were back in Korea?
Yeah, I think I see a lot of, the Koreans here that are, what do you call them? Like, they've recently immigrated. They're like, my age, like in their 20s or whatever. And I think they have an interesting culture too. And I don't really have close friends that are like, their first language is Korean. So it's kind of hard to communicate with them. But sometimes I do see them and I'm like, man, I feel like I would have had fun with them too. Like I would have had a good time with them too. But maybe I was just so intimidated by the language, honestly. Because also like Korean language has like the formal and the informal way of speaking to people, and I'm very informal in the way I talk, but that can also come off as really disrespectful when you meet someone new, even if they're the same age as you. So I was always worried about like that, like, oh, how do I talk to them but formally, but I don't know how to say the formal way of things, so I don't want to offend them. Yeah, so I don't want to offend them, but I don't want to be like super rude, and maybe I should just like avoid it altogether. So I just avoided it altogether.
So that's not something you've had to think about when interacting with like your parents' friends or something like that?
Yeah, and I think that was because they knew I was like this Korean American kid, and they had like no expectations of me whatsoever. But if I went to Korea and were the majority, I was literally like a super minority at that point, even though I'm Korean, being in Korea. But, I didn't want to I think I was just like constantly worried about being offensive and being rude, and I think they wouldn't have mind, but I think I was just, that fear was too overwhelming, where I was like, I'm gonna find my English speaking friends.
But I'm sure the food felt familiar.
Oh yeah, the food was great. It was great. Yeah. I always make fun of myself, and people make fun of me because I say I have like an old Korean man's like taste bud. Like,
what does that mean?
Like ajashi is like old man, right? That means I really like all the like young people food, you would say, like the trendy food, or like.
Wait, what's trendy food?
I don't even. It's like trendy food. Like Korea has like a lot of like new like bar food now, like fried chicken, that kind of thing, or like, the tteokbokki, like the spicy hot cakes, or like that's like I feel like a lot of older people eat it too, but that's a very like young people food. Like they're like on the street. It's like street food, so you're like on the go, maybe drinking or whatever, out with your friends late at night, and you can eat that, and it's readily available. But to me, I like the traditional Korean meals, like very like rice with your panchans, like all your side dishes and some soup. Like I always need like a soup. That's like apparently that's a very like old man thing. Like you always need soup. Like
what?
At like 99 degrees, like you need soup. Like it is.
Why do you think? Is it because your parents and like that's how you were raised on soup?
Yes, I think honestly it's probably because of the way I was raised. My mom was a stay-at-home mom, so she cooked all the meals. Like, made all the side dishes before like H Mart came in. And H Mart came in was great, but she still like cooked a lot. So I think I was so spoiled in that I always would have like 6 to 8 different side dishes, always with like a steamed rice and of course a soup. And like that was like literally our dinner. Maybe she cheated one day and did like public subs, but like literally like 99% of the meals were like,
you
these,
guys
like,
feasted.
Oh yeah, we like
every
feasted.
Single day.
Yeah. And like the thing is like also I remember like she would never make the same thing like twice in like 1 week, so she would always make something different. And like my brother ate a lot and my dad ate too, so like honestly we would go through it as a family like pretty fast. But I would just be so spoiled, like in the it's like so normal. But I know I had other like Korean American friends who, both their parents were working, so they had no time to, feed their children home cooked meals. They would just get like KFC or like McDonald's, which is so common back then to just pick up a meal for your family really quick so you don't have to cook and then feed them, So I think I was super spoiled, and I know I know I am. I mean, or I was at that point, because I don't do that now, and it's really sad.
Have you found a restaurant in Atlanta that comes close to
mom's cooking?
Mm-hmm.
I don't think my mom's cooking was like amazing by any means. I think she was a great home cook. I don't think she was like beyond just a normal like home cooked meal. But I don't know. There's some restaurants. Actually, there's some restaurants that I go to, like some on Beaver Highway.
What are they?
동네 방네 is right next to that famous yetta that everyone talks about. They have more. What was that? Oh.
I think it's a plane.
Okay. Or might be that. No, it's like that.
Oh yeah.
Sorry.
Okay.
No, it could be, yeah. Yeah, 동네방네 has like your traditional like Korean soups and stews and some meat and side dishes and rice. None of that like fancy like fusion or any of that stuff. I like the very like traditional. Like I'm very traditional when it comes to Korean food.
Like pure
Korean
just pure
food. Korean food. Yeah, like nothing new or nothing that comes up like, because Korean food right now in South Korea, like the food scene is insane. Like everyone is very big into food, and like the culture here is very into that too. But there's a lot of like new stuff that pops up here and there, like new dishes and stuff, and it like really catches on. But I always want my soup. Like I think that's how it's more traditional. It's like the soup and the rice and the side dishes. Like that's all I need. Like I don't need like Korean barbecue, for example. I think Korean barbecue is more trendier.
Oh,
yeah.
Wow.
Because not that it itself is trendy, but it has become trendy because of just the demand for it. And I think people are very intrigued by the way you cook meat in front of you and you like wrap it in lettuce and stuff. And I mean, it's different, I get it. But to me, that's trendy because a lot of people are gravitating towards that. And I'm like, what about this fermented soybean paste too with tofu? Like, hello, this is really good. You don't see that being like, you don't see those restaurants like popping up like every single, month. So.
Huh. I've never thought about that before.
I mean, I think it's just the way I was brought up, like cuisine wise, like I was very traditional in that sense. So to me, I just like sticking with what I know.
Has food always been an important part of your life?
Yeah, I would say yes, but I also, it's important. I do enjoy food, but it's funny because I think the older I get, the more I'm just going back to Korean food. I think when I was younger in college and post-college even, I was always like curious about different like cuisines and trying all kinds of new restaurants and innovating dishes by chefs, and especially right now in the age that we live in. But now I'm like, I just want some rice and soup. Like that makes me more like 50 times happier than going to like a Michelin star restaurant. Mm-hmm. So I know like I'm so rooted in that in Korean food. Like it's kind of ridiculous.
Wow. Do you know how to make food?
Korean food?
Korean food, sorry.
Oh. Actually, I don't know. That's a good question. Some things, yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I love having H Mart and all these grocery stores nearby because they're literally prepare everything for me, so I don't have to do all the hard work.
Where do you live right now?
I live in Buckhead.
Okay.
Yeah. It's kind of far from things, but it's okay. I'm so willing to drive. Yeah. And Beaver Highway is nice, obviously, because it's like the halfway point before going into Duluth and Swanee, which is like super far, but I'll always be down to eat around this area and Beaver Highway.
Cool. Okay, so let's go back to I think we were talking about college.
Yeah. And then food just took over, and as it always does.
As it always does.
Yeah.
Okay, so in college, you majored in international affairs.
Oh yeah, Korea.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then you went to Chile.
Yeah.
What was that experience like compared to your experience in Korea? Which I know is a weird comparison.
Yeah. But I mean, so,
if you could.
Yeah, like completely different. Chile was, I mean, talking about feeling like an outsider in Korea, it was just the same, of course, in Chile. I went with a close friend of mine who was also Korean American. So I think that was nice having kind of like that comfort and that person that you're just have someone to go back to if anything. So Chile was very interesting because I had no idea what the culture was like before I went there.
Did you know Spanish?
Yeah, so I mean, I studied Spanish, but studying Spanish in school is totally different from living in a country that speaks Spanish. But I went there because I wanted to challenge myself, the speaking wise, like speaking with other students, speaking with professors, finding even trying to find a community. So that was definitely a challenge because you really have to give up your pride and realize that it's not going to be perfect. But I think the people there were super friendly and were very willing to work with my language level. So that was something that was always appreciated, But the culture was completely different. I mean, I didn't know what I was going into at all. I just had nothing. I had no idea what to expect, and I also was surprised every time I learned something. So,
what do you think is, it's hard to answer what the biggest thing that you brought home was, but what are things that you brought back to Atlanta that you learned from Chile?
In Chile, I want to say the language, but not really. I learned that Spanish is all not the same.
That's true.
That is, yeah. I mean, I think it's crazy because we're just, we're used to the school textbook Spanish, which is very simplified and easy and concise and clear. But then you go to South America and everyone has their own way of speaking Spanish, and it's mind blowing because it doesn't even sound like Spanish sometimes, but they're speaking Spanish, but they do slangs, or they do a certain accent, or they leave consonants out sometime, or something different where you're like, do I know this language? Everything in school was a fraud, why did I even go to school for this? So that's how I felt. So I think I brought that back, just even the just knowledge of knowing hey, Spanish is not the same everywhere. Just when you go to Korea, there's different dialects of Korean when you go to the south and north parts of country. I know, China has different dialects of Chinese or Mandarin, and there's just so many languages that have different dialects everywhere. Even Arabic, has their own different things. And I think I just forgot that or did not know that going into that country.
That's really cool that in how everything was different, you notice a similarity between that and then also Korean language, etc.
Yeah.
Were there any other things that you're looks like we have more in common than I expected?
I think no, they were pretty different. I think I'm trying to now I'm trying to compare my thoughts to comparing to the Korean side of me or the American side, right? Because I think the American side of me can say there's a lot of things in common. Chileans are very social, very very social, and love staying up late and talking and being up. I think Americans do that, for the most part. Koreans do that now, the younger people, but I think the older people were not really keen on that. But yeah, I'm trying to think what else. There were some common things, but
what do you think your parents would say if they went to Chile and I don't know, we're with you and experiencing this new culture too?
They would say, why do they eat so late? It's funny because I just made a Chilean friend from my yoga studio, and we were she's about to go out to Santiago today. She's flying. And I remember we were talking about dinner time. And I was like, yeah, like your dinner time is at like 10 p.m. Like, what's that about? And she's like, yeah, because we love like staying up and talking. And I was like, man, my parents, like, just thinking about that now, my mom is like 5 p.m., 5:30, 6 p.m. is dinner time. So they would be like, why is dinner at like 11 p.m., you know? But they would be, I think my mom would not be happy about that because she's always like, you have to eat earlier, you have to eat before you sleep, you know? It's like not good for you, like health-wise or whatever. But maybe that's something that would come up in conversation.
That's so funny.
Yeah.
Oh, and so when you went to South Korea,
Mhm.
that was the only time that you've been back to South Korea.
No, I went when I was really young, when I was 3.
Okay.
And then, get this, my parents shipped me alone when I was like 6.
No
Yeah.
way.
Yeah.
That's terrifying.
Yeah, I know. You're telling me. No.
Why?
I think it was in the summer. Like, I think it was, I don't think it was like either going into 2nd grade or no, I think it was going to 3rd grade. And it was in the summer. I think my brother had a lot of things to do. He was in high school, so he had like a lot of camp or something. My mom was going to be really busy with him, and then they're like, oh, you should just go to Korea. And I was like, I didn't really have a choice. So I was like shipped on but there was no direct flight back then. So, but the thing is, they had like Korean Air had like a big like, not program, but kind of where like, you know, kids would be sent back to Korea. So they would like kind of, the stewardesses would kind of like host these kids. Like they would like give them extra care, extra attention, like hold your hand and like lead you guys to, you know, when you're transferring, you would have to like go together because you have no idea what you're doing at you're 6, 7 years old. Or like, we were all ages. I think they were like from my age, like I was probably one of the younger ones to like the early teens. So we would like kind of be like this like huddled group of, you know, poor kids that were like abandoned in the summer. But yeah, so I was like shipped to Korea when I was like 7 or 6, and it was frightening at first, but then I decided that it was gonna be really fun because I could do whatever I want. If my mom could not say no to things, I could eat whatever I want. I could buy whatever I want. I was like showered with like just love, and like I was so spoiled. So that was great.
Child.
Yeah, the wild child. Yeah, I took full advantage of that with no shame. Came back with like an extra suitcase of stuff. My mom was like, "What happened?" I was like, "This is what you get for shipping me off to Korea by myself." Like, there's no one behind you to say, "Oh no, she doesn't need that." Like, I was like, "No, I'm gonna take that.
Wow.
I'll take that extra set of pajamas." Like,
So were all the kids you were with also like children who were of immigrant parents that were from
Probably.
America?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And it was with a program, like you didn't stay with relatives or anything?
No. I did stay with relatives, but just getting there,
Gotcha.
yeah, like, you know, because
yeah.
you're kids, you don't know how to like transfer at a different terminal. So they had like stewardesses that helped you along the way. But yeah, once you're at the airport, you're fair game. You better have relatives there to pick you up, which I did. So I mean, that was great. But
Do you remember anything from your time there with your relatives?
Oh yeah,
What do you remember?
I remember, like I said, I was showered a lot with like gifts and being spoiled. I think my Korean was okay. I don't think it was terrible, but I think I knew how to converse with, like, I had cousins my age. I could converse with my aunts. I wasn't like, you know, you're a kid, so I think when you meet other kids, you find ways to play with each other, just, you know, despite the language barriers. So, but yeah, I remember eating a lot. I remember going to I remember going to different parts of Korea.
Did it feel foreign?
Oh yeah, totally foreign. Yeah, it was like bizarre. Yeah. It was bizarre. I mean, it was like, well, first, you know, coming from Atlanta, Georgia, where it's like not even a big city at the time, and then you're in like Korea, Seoul, with like skyscrapers, and you're walking places, and you're taking subways, you know, it's like, what is this? You know, at 7 years old, you have no idea what's going on.
Yeah.
So that was all different. Food was fine, obviously. I mean, I was like used to it growing up within my household. And then, yeah, I think culture, I guess, I don't know if the culture thing was hitting me yet as a kid, but obviously, like, language is a thing. But I think, like I said, I think when you're younger, you're not totally aware of most things. You're just kind of playing with each other and trying to, Pokemon was big. I remember Pokemon was,
On the Game Boy?
Game Boy, TV. Yeah, Pokemon show. Pokemon's really big.
Yeah. With like the Mewtwo and Mew.
Yeah, Mewtwo, yep, that was the big ones, yep. And Dragon Ball Z, maybe a little bit here and there. Digimon, yeah, like a lot of anime. I remember watching that.
Did you follow that in America too?
Yeah. Yeah, Pokemon was just big.
Yeah, for sure. Oh my gosh, I remember it. So
I had like the manual, like the.
Oh yeah, me too.
Yeah, I had all the manual with all the different Pokemon in it.
Yeah,
and then I would have the Game Boys, all the Game Boy games. That was big. That was good times. Yeah. But yeah, you can bond over that with your kids.
That's so true. It's so easy.
Doesn't take much. Yeah, it doesn't take much. Yeah, it's so easy.
Oh man. Okay, cool. So going back to college. So funny.
It's okay. It's not relevant.
I know. Okay, so after college, what did you end up doing? And what do you do now, by the way?
Yeah. So I'm very interesting. So after college, I was trying to go into nonprofits because my international affairs background, but that didn't really work out. So I needed a job, and I was like, I need to make money somehow. So I got into media, which is like, I would say media buying, if you can make that. So advertising, but media buying in the sense that I always tell people this, like, it's not the commercials, it's not the magazine glossy pages, it's the space that you're buying, right? Like, how are you...
The real estate.
Yeah, the real estate. Think of media buying as just the real estate. You're not putting the pretty graphic designs or the content out there. You're literally just purchasing the space.
Did you like that?
I got into it because I actually had a lot of... not a lot, but a good handful of friends that are older than me, like 2-3 years older, that were in the field. And I think I was just intrigued by something different. Maybe advertising kind of sounded fun because I did take an intro class in college. And then I found a job.
So I guess you didn't want to pursue international affairs after all.
I tried for a long time, yeah. And actually, I didn't give that up for a couple of years after, even when I was in media. I still wanted to go to DC. I still wanted to work in government. And somehow the doors just kept shutting. So I was like, all right, it's not for me. So that was something that I gave up willingly. It was fine. I wasn't like totally invested in it. I didn't have all my eggs in that basket, but I just thought it made sense with my background, but at the same time I was like, oh, it's okay, like I can live without it. Yeah. But I worked in media for the last, I would say, 5 years of my 4 to 5 years at post college, and then I went to CNN and I worked there as a contractor, and then I started doing freelance work because I wanted to go to CNN to learn production, and I was an associate producer on some of their international news shows.
Was there something that triggered you to want to study production or learn more about it?
I don't know. I think I was always kind of intrigued by it. Like, I'm very intrigued by a lot of things. So, yeah, I'm just like, oh, this is like, kind of looks interesting. Like, how does that work? Like, what's the behind the scenes like? I also had friends who studied film in college, and I was kind of like, oh, this would be it seemed very, like, fast paced, right? Very, think on your feet. Honestly, it wasn't a desk job, right? Like, that's the thing, that was, like, one of the bigger things that I was, like, intrigued by was, like, oh, I want to be on my feet, see what it's like, producing something, making something work with my, like, walking around, running around, whatever it takes, So I took that position, and then I worked there for, like, the last 8 to 10 months, and then now I'm starting a new job next week back in media.
Oh.
Yeah. Wow. I took a break from CNN during the summer, basically, and I actually am starting a coffee roastery company.
Tell me more.
Called Red Tree Coffee Company. Yeah, one of my friends is my partner. He's a coffee roaster.
What's his name?
Phil Pion, if you ever listen to this. But he loves coffee, and he started roasting as a hobby, and then after a couple of years, I'm like, dude, let's just do this. Like, I think it'll be fun. So he's like, all right. And then we just started, I think, this past year. And I say officially May because that's when we got our business license, but we were like in the works of doing it for like the past like year not year and a half, but like at least year.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
there's a lot going on.
There's a lot to
There's a
unpack
lot. Yeah,
there.
there's a lot going on.
Wow. Okay, so Phil has been roasting beans for the
Mhm.
past 3 years.
Yeah.
And you've known Phil.
I've known Phil. So Phil came down. I know him through church. Phil came down as a PhD at Emory. He's at Emory right now doing his PhD in genetics. I was like, microbiology? No, genetics. So he's been working on that for 7 years. That's when I met him, was like literally when he moved down. And yeah, and then we were friends, and like within the last 3 years, it was like he was roasting coffee, and I typically did not drink black coffee too. So I remember when I tried his coffee, I was like, oh my gosh, I can drink this black.
That was the first time that you drank black
Well,
coffee.
I
and
would
liked
drink it, yeah, and liked it.
Yeah.
I would drink black coffee once in a while, but I never really liked it, enjoyed it. And then I had, because Starbucks, right? Or Dunkin' Donuts, like that's commercialized coffee industry is what I usually think of black coffee, especially in college. You can't afford $5 pour overs and and there's nothing fancy in college. So, but yeah, and then when he made me his pour over, with his him personally roasting beans or whatever, I was like, wow, this is good.
What do you think you could describe what made it good?
I think it was just the fact that it wasn't bitter, and it was very nutty. It was sometimes like Korean actresses pop up in my head, but it's like 고소해, which means like smooth and like clean, kind of very like nutty-ish, where it's like it's not overwhelming but it's not underwhelming. It was just very like well balanced cup of coffee, and I was like, wow, this is really good, because usually coffee can be bitter, or it's like sour, or it's like burnt tasting, or yeah, I just didn't like those notes. So when I tried his, I was like, oh, this is good, because I can drink it black. That's when when you drink coffee. And
what makes his coffee so special? How does he do that?
No, I think he just I think he's working on his craft too, right? I think you just start off, and then you just keep developing your craft more and more. So I think the more he just gets comfortable with learning how to control the heat in the roastery machine, or like getting certain beans and trying to bring out different flavors out of them, that's just his art. Yeah, I'm just like the business or whatever person.
Well, at what point did you say, let me be a part of this journey too?
It was like sometime last year, I think, when we were realizing like, hey, this would be kind of cool to do, and if this like took off, like we would totally both love it. I think I don't really want to speak for him, but for me, I never found myself like wanting a specific career. Like I don't want to. I'm not aspiring to be a certain profession. So I feel like I'm always intrigued, right? I always have like all these interests, but I think coffee is something that's kind of fun too, because it's so focused on the ingredient. Like it's like funny because it's just one coffee bean, but somehow it can all taste different, right? From like all parts of the world too, which I love that there's like a global aspect to coffee too, right? There's Asian coffee, there's African coffee, of course, coffee in Hawaii, coffee in Jamaica, like South American coffee, like literally all over the world, which is so cool. But also the fact that it's just like one ingredient, and you can't somehow that one ingredient, there's so much in it, and you can either mess it up or like bring it to life, right? And it's so simple, right? In a sense, like it's just one coffee bean, but it's also in the sense like, how do you bring out that flavor of the bean? How do you roast it to a way where the consumer like me or you can drink it and be like, wow, I really taste somehow like floral notes, or like kind of sounding pretentious, but really though, like it's kind of cool. Like you're like, wow, I can taste like orange, even though there's no like orange flavoring in it. It's just from the agriculture, from the land, and I think that's so cool that you can experience something different from just like a coffee cup, like drinking a cup of coffee. So I like that idea. It's like very romantic. So yeah, that's what I've been up. That's my side project. But yeah.
It's also cool because it reminds me of what you said about why you like soup, about how it's like the pureness of it.
Yes.
And it sounds so similar to how you describe the coffee bean.
Yeah.
Which is really cool.
Yeah.
So tell me about the journey from, I guess, what were the kinds of conversations you were having from the beginning of like, oh, maybe, and then like at what point, or describe that moment when you're like, no, let's make this a reality, and how'd you feel? What made it happen? And then
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think we were just kind of like toying with the idea for like I would say a year and a half of it, and then I think the final decision point was just I don't know what I want to do with my life, but I want to try something that will push me and I know will give me so much growth that like a college degree or like a job can offer. I think really trying to start your own business is like really challenging. You're just learning so many things about yourself, about the industry, like whatever industry you're in, the way you work, the way other people are, like networking. And really it's awesome I think because you just get to meet all kinds of people. Like you don't really get to do that with like a desk job or with what I've been in media, you know? So that was like the pushing point, but I really also like I don't know, I think not the major pushing point, but a very like a pushing point that kind of was like a 40-30% contributor was the fact that, we're Asian American and I kind of was like this is something that I have never seen another Asian American do and I think this would be really cool for us to like do something like this in the city where because we would talk about all these different coffee roasteries, right? Like in Georgia or in the world, like Stumptown or Blue Bottle or all the ones that you know of, or like these big ones, and they're predominantly like white male, industries, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I think it's just like why I wonder why there isn't other ethnicities like tapping into that because coffee, like I said, is very international. It's not like specific to one region or one area. It's grown all over the world. And so I think for me, I don't want to say for him, but for me, it really pushed me because I wanted to do something that was out of the norm and kind of meet different people along the way and tell our story too. Because I feel like when I talk to my other Asian American friends or just even my other friends in general, they're just like, wow, that's like really different. And I'm like, yeah, I mean, it is. Like we want to be different. But yeah, just pushing the boundaries and kind of opening the horizons for more opportunities for, I don't know, maybe like if word gets out there, like maybe someone listening or someone who heard of us in like some Korean or some like Chinese American in like Kansas will be like, oh shoot, I should start my own coffee roastery. It's like, I know I love coffee too. It's like, that'd be awesome, like catching fire, which is so easy to do nowadays because of the internet. And I think it's just cool to talk about what we do and like have a passion for something besides like what's expected out of us. So I don't know, I'm very big on that. Like,
yeah, I can.
Yeah, you can
definitely.
Yeah,
and it's amazing.
Yeah, well, it's just like I don't know. I have a heart because I know what it's like to have gone through it and deal with the expectations from your family and wanting to be like a provider, for your future, but at the same time, like, where will we be as a culture? Will we just be all the doctors and lawyers of the world? Which I mean, that's fine. Don't get me wrong. We always need doctors and lawyers, but it's just like as a race, we've always, I don't know about your school, but like at UGA, like all 99% of my kids or not my kids, my friends were bio majors, or like 20% were accounting, like it's like such a huge, like everyone goes down the same paths because I get it though, like you don't know what you want to do and it's hard to figure out what you want to do, but hey, at least you have a profession where you can make a lot of money, and that's like something that people are like holding onto that idea. So I'm like, all right, well, I don't blame you for wanting money and security, but at the same time, like, what about the rest of us? Like, what about people who don't want to do accounting and that don't want to do finance or be doctors and be nurses and lawyers and stuff like that? I'm pretty sure not all of us are interested in science and not all of us are interested in learning how to fund your money well, like through stock options, like it's just like we have so many interests and we're I think that's the beauty of being in America too, is that you're allowed to like have all these interests and like learn about different things and like not be like judged or by that. Like it's cool if anything, and I think we as a generation, as like you can call us 1.5 second gen, we have the opportunity to like be different from our parents, and I think that's something that I'm such a huge like advocate for my friends. And then like, don't, this is like not all just my thinking too, but I've like read like blogs or just talked to other people and have like kind of collected, different sides of the story and different sides of what they've gone through. So yeah.
Can you think, what's like a person or maybe a book or something that has particularly influenced the way you think and how you are in all of this?
Man, it's called, I'm trying to remember her blog. It's like, I think she's part of this, like this Taiwanese American who writes on this blog called the Salt Collective. But she talks a lot about just wrestling with like Asian American culture or like her identity, living in the American culture. And she like wrote this one article that I think like opened my eyes so much, because I think you always know these things in your head, and then when someone just kind of speaks it out or like you see the words, it like makes a bigger like realization for you, which I can totally share with you. But it's like she wrote this article about like the quarter Asian American life crisis, and it was really interesting because she's older. I think she's probably in her mid-30s now, but she literally talks about how her friends are like in their mid-30s and they're like, I don't know what I'm doing with my life. And they all have like this like quarter life crisis. And she talks about like where that comes from, right? Like how these Asian Americans were like not trained, but were told and heavily influenced by their parents to pursue the security and to pursue the 9 to 5 and the 6-figure salary, because their parents worked very tiresome jobs, working very odd hours, and they don't want that for their kids. And I totally understand that, but just kind of like striving for that security more than anything. And now these, they're 35 and they're like, oh my gosh, like I don't like what I'm doing. And I studied college, I went to this school, I went to master's school, and now I'm like, why am I doing this? Like, what was the reason behind doing this? And kind of seeing that security wasn't enough, and not saying like everyone has a passion, and some people just love the security, and that's great, but I think there's just some of us out there who have never been pushed to pursue something, greater. And it's always kind of like being comfortable and being safe. And that can speak to all people of different backgrounds, but just especially for us with our parents that have gone through a lot immigrating to the US, they just don't want that for us. So I feel like they're like, why would you do anything risky? So that's something that my parents honestly didn't really push that on me, but I see it amongst all my friends. I think my parents just let me alone. Left me alone. But
have you told them about the coffee company?
No. I think my mom lives in Korea right now. Yeah, she moved there 3 years ago, but she's coming back this year, and I just drop it on her like here and there. But it's always like I think for Phil too, it's kind of like, oh, let that be a hobby, right? It's like something that extreme or something that unique or different. It's like, oh, you can do that on the side, you can do it on the side with your lawyer job. It's like, what life do you live in where you can handle like working like 40, 50-hour weeks with like trying to handle something else, which we're trying to right now. But I think the end goal for us is like, this would be great if this was like our livelihood, like not saying we want to make like obnoxious sums of money off of it, but I think it would just be awesome to do, and like kind of be like, oh wow, like there's this is something that you don't see in your normal everyday like Asian American community, so I think that's
if you can imagine Red Tree Coffee Company existing maybe like 5 years from now, what would that look like?
Oh, I mean we would have somewhat of income. We would at least be getting some money out of it, like where we can both like sustain. I think we have a warehouse right now in Chambly, like literally off the street.
Where is it going to be, by the way? Do you know?
Our warehouse?
Or the coffee company?
We have a warehouse. We're not gonna open like a storefront or like a coffee shop. Yeah, that's not our goal as of now, unless someone throws off, like someone gives us $1 million, like sure, we'll do it. But we have a warehouse right literally off of Buford Highway, and it's by like Halal Guys. Yeah, basically right there in that corner. But yeah, we've been there, and we picked that area also because purposefully, because we kind of wanted to be around Buford Highway, and just like how much it offers, and I think there's a lot of great things happening in that neighborhood right now, just in general. Like, people are kind of giving more attention to it. People are really intrigued by it, so it's like it's something that we wanted to be near, and just like, and the community too, obviously. So
have you gotten to know the people around that warehouse? Like, I guess the guys at the halal guys.
Oh, not me personally, because I don't. My roaster goes there more because he like roasts out of there.
So that's not Phil.
No, that is Phil.
Oh, that is Phil. Okay,
yeah. Phil goes there. I don't know if he probably does. I mean, he eats out a lot. But yeah, I mean, like, we know some of the neighbors that we share like the warehouse space with. Yeah, I mean, well, I met Marion.
Yeah.
Yeah, through just like I was like telling her. There's like there's so many different businesses and different stories on Beaver Highway, so that's awesome too. And just like having a person that's like connected, that also helps too, just to know.
Are you involved with the We Love Buhai?
I went to like one event, but nothing like very recent, like this past summer, but not really.
Yeah. So growing up, were you did you frequently visit Buford Highway? Like,
yes.
Is it part of your... Okay,
yeah.
Gotcha.
Buford Highway was like the place. Like, the Buford Highway Farmers Market was the only place to get Asian ingredients. Yeah, the food. Like, there's a restaurant right by El Rey. You know Tea House Formosa?
Yeah.
There's a Yinjing. It's a Chinese, what do you call it? Korean Chinese restaurant.
Mm-hmm.
That restaurant has been there. You should interview them. That restaurant has been there for like my entire life plus more. Like, they are the original.
Wow.
Like, and I say this because my mom told me, because I didn't even know, but she told me before my dad moved to Atlanta. They like flew to Atlanta from LA just to check it out, and they ate like jjajangmyeon there, like the black noodles. Oh, yeah. And I was like, she was pregnant with me at the time. And she's like, yeah, like, you literally had this in the womb. And I'm like, and I, the owners I still know them. Like, or I don't know them, but like, I see them, I know who they are. Like, they're two sisters. I think they're twins. And they're like, I think they're Chinese, but they grew up partly in Korea. So they're trilingual. They speak perfect Korean, perfect Chinese, and perfect English. And yeah, they're interesting. Like, they're cool. Yeah, they own that restaurant forever. It's like a huge family business thing.
Wow. Yeah, I feel like a lot of the places on Buford Highway go way
back. Yeah.
How have you seen it change, if you can remember?
Yeah, I would say things have gotten nicer. Definitely a lot more businesses, a lot more, obviously, new types of food. I see a lot of, I see honestly a lot more like Asian American stuff popping up, like, new tea houses, new bubble tea places, new dessert places, new restaurants. But I think that the amount of food, I mean, obviously when I grew up, it was, I think, majority like Asian food, Chinese food, and maybe some Mexican food. But now, I mean, you have like Malaysian food, you have like Thai food, you have all kinds of different kinds of foods. And I'm pretty sure that was not there, like in the mid-90s. Yeah, that's nice, like seeing how much people are kind of finding comfort in each other of all different backgrounds, like in that one like long road. But yeah, like knowing that people are gonna go there and seek out something different is like, that's a cool place to have,
What's your vision for the coffee company, kind of like interacting with and connecting with everyone else on Buford Highway?
I think we're just trying to get to know like everyone around the area, like all the different businesses, and I think that would be just really cool to like know their stories, like just like you heard mine, and just like kind of knowing that and having that community. And if it's being involved, I don't know, like I don't know what that will look like, just because I mean, we're just coffee, like we don't have huge. Yeah, I mean, the coffee is huge, but like we don't have like a space where people can come. But I mean, it'd be cool to serve like our coffee in like different coffee shops, like in that whole area, if they're, if they start coming up more and more. I feel like it's more like bubble tea and drinks right now, but like coffee hasn't really hit it too much. But that'd be cool to like just like work with different businesses and like getting to know just more people who are like wanting to be involved or like seek out that kind of community or Buford Highway because it's so diverse. I think that's awesome. Yeah.
Do you have friends or relatives that live on Buford Highway by chance?
As of now, no. I have people who live really close by it, like Chambly.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But not particularly on that road. Like maybe some side streets. Like
Yeah. There's like so much.
There's so
connected.
much. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So, what's next then for the coffee company? Like, what are you going to do now?
Find businesses. Yeah, I think our goal is just to sell our coffee.
Yeah.
And may it be slow or steady, or may it be like a huge wave. It doesn't really matter for us because we're enjoying the ride. But just kind of telling our story and meeting people, I think is great. I think that's our next step, is just to meet like lots of different kinds of people. And I think coffee is so versatile in the way that it can be everywhere. Like it's not like you need much to serve coffee. Like you can literally have like a hand grinder and some hot water and there you have coffee. You don't need like the fancy machines or anything. But I think my roaster Phil, reason why he loves coffee so much is that it really brings people together. Just like sit down and talk, and you don't have to like eat and shell food, but you can literally just, it's kind of more just there as like comfort, and then you just have great conversations around it. So I think that's like, I love that vision of his too.
I love that. I know I love coffee. What would you say to someone who was kind of in that scenario that you had described about, like, there's these expectations put on them by their identity, by their culture. What is something that you would say to them?
It's so hard because I just don't know what their situation is, but I would say, like, just really evaluate your life and not just say, like, who are you living for in a sense, but, like, I mean, if you can, right? Like, I know finance is really hard for lots of people my age and trying to, like, support their parents and who knows how many people they're supporting, but at the end, like, is that really going to bring you happiness? Like, are you going to look back and be regretful? And if you think that supporting your family is a huge priority, then by all means, like, do it. I think that's something respectable in itself. But also I feel like at the same time, like, it is your life, God gave you one life. Like, you have one life, and I'm blessed in that I can say, like, I don't really have to worry about my parents' future, but at the same time, it is, it's every day. Like, every day you wake up, like, are you gonna be okay with what you're doing? And not saying that you have to be, like, totally passionate or gung-ho about anything, but just kind of reevaluating, like, what your priorities are, and realizing that, you have so much more to offer than just security. And I think that a lot of people just think money will solve a lot of issues, but which it can, don't get me wrong, but I think at the same time, like, knowing that you're worth more than just the comforts and the safe, like, security of having a 401k, which I have a 401k, so I'm not bashing anyone who has a 401k, but, like, just like just knowing that you offer so much more, and you have, I think a lot of people underestimate the passion that they have, and they're so afraid to pursue it. And really just, I mean, I speak this to myself, but it's just like not to be afraid of failure. I think as we're trained as when we're younger to be perfect at everything, like, if you don't get 100 on the test, that means you didn't study hard enough, or if you're failing in math, it's because you're not understanding it hard enough. So I think it's just realizing that you have strengths and weaknesses, and there's nothing wrong with just working on your strengths instead of focusing on your weaknesses too. But I don't know if I just kind of...
No, I think that's beautiful.
And this is also, like, collected from many of conversations of other different people.
Of
so
course.
I'm speaking for not just for me, but the many people that I've talked to and have read and have, conversed with. So yeah.
I'm trying to think of
about
what
it.
to ask next.
I mean, hey, we've been talking for
It was like for a long time.
but anyway.
I think I've learned so much about you.
I mean,
it's amazing.
Oh yeah, I mean.
But gosh, okay. So
Yeah.
I don't know. Like, do you have time? Like, do you want to keep talking?
I can talk for at least another 15 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was gonna ask about your dad because you said your mom was in Korea. But is your dad still in Alpharetta?
So my dad passed away 6 years ago.
Oh.
Yeah. So
I'm sorry.
No, it's fine. Yeah. But he passed away 6 years ago, and then my mom got remarried and lives in Korea. Yeah.
Gotcha.
But my dad was definitely like the breadwinner.
I thought it was breadwinner.
Breadwinner.
I don't know if that makes sense.
It is. Breadwinner makes no sense. Breadwinner of the family. Yeah.
Yeah. Gotcha. Cool.
You can ask. Yeah. I mean.
Oh no, I'm just like thinking about what. Well, yeah. Like I guess that must have been hard. And how do you think that changed the way you thought or lived when that happened?
My dad passed away. I think it really brought into attention like that I just don't want to live a life. Let me backtrack. So my dad, gave his whole life to supporting the family, right? And I think he owned a liquor store. He worked Monday through Saturday, probably 16 hours every day, and he commuted from like Alpharetta to downtown. So it was like a long journey. And seeing that and the sacrifice is totally commendable by all means, but I think I wanted to challenge myself to be different in that way, that I didn't want to just be providing. And I think it's hard because I'm privileged in the way that I can do this. I know it's different from like people who totally come over with nothing and have to start from scratch. But since I am in this situation, or I'm in this moment where I have the privilege to do something because I'm not worrying about feeding like 4 family members, like I think I am trying to take advantage of really trying to figure out what I enjoy and what my strengths are and what I'm good at, and being kind of like unconventional in that way, because my parents were so conventional for us, so that I feel like I'm trying to be a little bit different. Yeah.
It's a really hard journey to figure out like
it is.
What you're good at, what you're here for.
Yeah, it's not easy at all.
How have you been doing that?
I think jobs have helped. I think even though all my past work experiences have not like truly what I want to do, I still think it still helps to figure out like what you're good at and what you're not good at, how you handle certain situations, what kind of coworker you are, how you do in group settings or group work, whatever projects, and all that stuff kind of all comes together. And I think each situation really brings out a different part of you, and that's just something that you just learn and you kind of carry that and move forward. And but yeah, I think that's really helped, honestly. It's just, even though all the jobs that I've done have not been like totally my passion per se, like I know what I've learned about myself through them. Like, you can always pick up things like, oh, I'm actually really good at like being the middle person and like resolving issues between people. Or you say like, oh, I'm actually pretty bad at like presenting. Like you just like learn things. Or you're like, oh, actually I'm pretty good at like finding random niches of people that like network somehow and find someone who like knows how to cook like, Sri Lankan food, like something like crazy like that, So I think that's like where you just learn more about yourself from like your given situations, right?
Yeah. It's like exciting. You're like, oh, I didn't know that about myself. I feel that way a lot. I'm just like, oh, I like that about myself, instead of like being so used to like being self-conscious.
Yeah.
Or whatever.
But I think that's great, because I think that, I mean, we're in our 20s, right? Like I know you're in your 20s. Yeah. I'm in my 20s, so like it's such a great time, just to learn everything, because you're really on your own in a sense. You're working. I don't know if you're living at home, but you're like, you're living out away from parents. That's a whole nother thing. You do things by yourself sometimes, like you travel, or you like go to events and you like there's just so many things that you can learn about yourself from so many different situations.
So real.
Yeah.
Cool. Is there anything else that you feel like you want to say, either about yourself, about the coffee company, about Beaufort Highway?
No, I don't know. I think lately I look at my life and I realize, like, I'm so glad my parents came to Atlanta. Like, well, first of all, I'm glad they came to the U.S. Like, them immigrating was probably really when they knew, like, this could be a great opportunity for my future children. That was, wow, thank you so much. Like, I could not be speaking English with you right now if I, like, my parents didn't immigrate. And I think that our parents and our, like, our parents' generation, like, they've really done a lot. They've like broken the barrier, the hardest barrier, I think, of just entering and planning. I think now as 1.5 or second gens or whatever we are, like, now it's for us to kind of grow what they planned, like what they cleared for us, and I think that's where it's fun, and we really do have, like, the power and influence to shape our kids' generations and what they're going to be like. And I've kind of seen it with some of my friends who have parents that are like us, that have come, they're like second gen, and they're like, their kids are like, they only speak English to each other now. I'm like, that's so weird. Like, how are you guys communicating so well, But that's, like, great. And I think, like, relationships are stronger. I think they're a lot more understanding of what their kids are going through because they've gone through it. And I think that's, like, what I want for my future, kids, if I have kids. But, just the future generation is there to be, like, because there's just such a lost connection between our parents or the first gens and us because of the culture and the language barrier. So I feel like it'll be so refreshing for us to have that restored.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's pretty much it.
Cool.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I really appreciate it.
No, this was great. I guess.
Yeah.
Hey, we talked for 2 hours.
We did.
Like, easy.
See, there's still so much more. Like, I didn't even
Yeah.
ask about your parents and how they came, but I mean, do you want to talk about that?
I mean, if you guys want to just have it on record, like.
Yeah. Okay.
They came. I think in the 80s, 87 or 88, and they came, but. I know when my dad told me this, they were very privileged because they, Korean War was still, like, very devastating to the economy, but my dad's father had, like, a company, so I think they, like, somehow had money from it, so they came to the U.S. not with nothing. They had money. They came not with, like, incredible amounts of money, but they came with money, so they were, like, comfortable, and they had, like, time to, like, they traveled to U.S. just before I was born, of course. They, like, traveled to U.S. They saw, like, all the big, like, national parks. They, like, literally cross-countryed all over like, literally in the movies. Like, they did that. And I'm like, and then I was born in L.A., and then they stopped doing that. But, so they came, and they just, like, flew over. They just came. And, I mean, it's scary, right? But I think somehow they did know some amounts of people there. Like, just, like, friends of friends, like, oh, I have, in Korea, you'll be like, oh, I have someone in the LA, which is so common, of course, being Korean. So I think that's how they got connected, was just, like, knowing someone in LA. And I mentioned that my dad's sisters were there, so that was also, like, an area of comfort, too, just knowing that you had family there. So they just came to LA and kind of lived there for a bit and then had me. But that's pretty much it. It was pretty simple for them.
Cool.
Yeah, they didn't take, like, a boat or, like, they didn't, like, have some crazy adventure, and they just, like, literally hopped in a plane and, like, came over.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Cool.
But yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you again,
Yeah,
Joanna.
this is awesome. Talked a lot, but.
Okay, I'm going to get some room noise.
Okay.
I'm just going to let it sit for a while.
Mm-hmm.